Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Jess with So Many Creations, and this right here is Linda. This is my Linda Sling pattern, and we're gonna walk step by step through that in today's video. So this pattern right here was a collaboration pretty much from the jump. My good friend Linda actually did the design work on this one. She came and showed me what she had done, and I absolutely fell in love with it. I adored everything. This is kind of a modified version of my Charlotte, which is essentially a vertical pattern, and she made it into a horizontal bag. I took that and then made a few tweaks of my own, and here it is, the Linda Sling. So because my friend designed this, I did name it after her, and she does play around with patterns and do a little design work, but she doesn't write patterns, and that is where I come in. So she gave me permission to do that, and I just went running with it. One of the other reasons that this is a cool collaboration, it's still blowing my mind right now. This was actually featured in the August 2024 project box along with Lauren from Mormino and Nicole from Sonar. And one of the other contributions I made to that box, aside from this pattern, was this cork right here. This cork was designed by Lauren. It's on a pearl white shimmer. It's absolutely beautiful. I'm telling you, in person, even better. And after Lauren designed it, I had it produced. I got to contribute that along with a few other things and this pattern to the box. Myself, Nicole, and Lauren all worked really hard and we're so excited about it. It just came out like a week ago, so it's still really fresh in my mind. Perhaps when you're watching this video, it will be a thing of the past. It's hard to say at this point. But anyway, let's take a look at some of the features of this bag. One of the things that I really love is that the flap here kind of has a few purposes. It's beautiful for showing off any cork or vinyl that you have. This bag, just a little side note, is going to lean heavily towards raw edge materials because a lot of the seams are still going to be exposed. So the flap is finished, the base is finished, but there's a lot of little details that work really best with non-cotton materials. If you want to use a woven material, you might want to make a few changes or take a look at my Charlotte pattern. I'm going to link that video up here for you. So anyway, let's get back into this awesome bag. So not only do we have this great flap to show off embroidery or a monogram, a cool tag, just a gorgeous cork like this one, on the back side, there's an ID window. And when you go into a store or a bank and you're holding your bag either as a crossbody or wearing it like I do as a sling, it's so easy to just pull your ID up and show whoever needs to see it. You don't have to go rummaging through your bag for your wallet. Underneath this flap, there's also 6 credit card pockets. There is 2 options for closures, and you are welcome to make any adjustments you want for your preferred closure. In the pattern, I'm going to include, or I already did include, a fashion snap as well as a standard magnetic snap. That's what we're going to talk about in this video. If you want tips on a fashion snap, you have 2 options. You can, well, 3 options. You can read the pattern. You can follow the directions in there. You can also watch my Linda Sew Along, which we did live. I'll link that for you. Or I have a separate video talking about snaps. This particular fashion snap that I purchased from Cam Snaps, I'll put their website right here for you. In that video, it's not talking about the pattern, but more about the hardware. And I'll show you the different components. I'll give you a silly little rhyme that I use to remember the pieces, and I'll show you the dies. I'll link all of that for you so it's easy to find. So that's the front of the bag. On the top, there is a zipper. Now, I chose not to put any pockets inside of mine. The original Linda, designed by Linda, she did put a zippered pocket inside. You are welcome to add anything you want. I just felt like I didn't need the extra pocket inside. On the back here, you have a snap tab. You have this great big open pocket, which is perfect for sunglasses or your cell phone. It also has a zippered pocket. Please also note that this zippered pocket is not fully finished. So you're going to see the back of your cork and your zipper. You might even see a little bit of your hardware. That is designed that way to reduce bulk for you. If you want to do a traditional fully finished zipper, you could do that as well. The pocket lining back here, I encourage you to choose something that looks good on both sides. A solid, an Essex linen like I have, a water-resistant canvas or cotton, something that's not going to have a specific front and back to it. I did use waterproof canvas for my lining. You can also use interface cotton. It's totally your call. In the pattern, you also have the option to do a sling style or a crossbody. There's 2 different options included. In this video, I'm actually going to show you both. Now, I would not normally do both in one bag. I don't think that it would be as practical, and it would also look a little silly if you were using these D-rings and these guys were just kind of hanging out, but it's your bag and you can make whatever choice you want. In the video, I'm going to show you how to do both of those. That way you have an idea. The pattern is going to include enough hardware for one, so you're going to be making this set of tabs for either this or this. I added some extra hardware just for this video. This one has a magnetic snap on the front and back, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So you'll have both options for installation. Other than that, I just have to say, I think this is becoming one of my new favorite bags. And if you couldn't tell, I feel like all of my samples might show you that. Is there ever too many samples? I'm not sure. This awesome one was made by my friend Mary Ellen in Eric's EVL line. And look at this awesome, kind of guyish, rugged outside with hot pink inside. This is one of my favorites. They're all my favorite. I love them all. So if you're excited, grab your pattern. You can find that right here on my website, or maybe you have a printed copy in your project box. You can download or get your pieces together. There's a few templates to cut. Gather your supplies, get yourself a glass of water. We're gonna sit down and sew this together from start to finish, and I'm gonna give you all the tips and tricks that I have. If you like videos like this, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and click the notification bell. All right, let's get into it. I went ahead and gathered all of my supplies. I have my pieces all cut out for my outside and my lining. I've also grabbed my hardware and all of the other pieces that I'm going to need. So let's go ahead and get right into it. For the bag outside, I have 2 of my A pieces. Now, all of my outside is made out of cork, so there's no interfacing. This bag can be made out of cotton if you would prefer. We will not be going over it in this video, and you would have to make a few changes here and there, such as on your ID window and your credit card pockets and a few other places. But if you wanted to sub your flap and your main pieces for cotton, you would just want to make sure those were interfaced, and you can absolutely do that. So let's get back into that. Sorry, got a little sidetracked already. So I've got 2 pieces for A. I did cut mine out of 2 different corks. This is totally up to you how you want to do it. I kind of made this one really random, just like I did on this one. So there's my front A. This is my back A, the polka dot. I just let it be whatever it wanted to be. So I've got 2 A's. I also have 2 B's. My B's are for my flap. Those I did cut out of the same cork. I have my 3 C's. These are going to be for the credit card pockets. So those are going to be underneath the flap on the front. I have 1 D, and D is going to be for the back. It's the outside of the pocket. There is going to be a coordinating fabric piece, which we'll get to, but this is my D right here. I also have my 2 E's. These are going to be for the zipper tabs right up here. I have my 2 pieces for F. F is going to be my removable adjustable handle. I have 2 G's. These are going to be for the tabs that you can either add on to make the sling version, or you can add them onto the back to make the crossbody version. I will show you both in this video. I have my H piece right here, and in the instructions, you're going to have 2 different sizes for H. Be careful which one you cut depending on the closure you're going to use. So H is right here, and for this bag, I used a fashion snap. That is what I talked about in the pattern, as well as in the Linda Sew Along, which is linked on the tutorials and the live tab. For today, I'm going to do the second option that's in the pattern, and I'm going to use a standard magnetic snap. We will get into that when we talk about the hardware, but make sure that you know what closure you're using so you cut your H correctly. There's 2 different width measurements. The height stays the same. So I have my H. I have my I for my ID window. I did already cut the center out using the template in the pattern. I have J. J is going to be for the zipper overlay. Again, I used the template that was in the pattern. If you have the zipper overlay templates that I sell on my website, you could also use any of those if you wanted a different shape. The one that's included in the pattern is just a standard rectangle, which I think looks really nice on the smaller pocket, but you can do whatever you would prefer. If you want to skip this, you can. You're just going to have to cut this center rectangle directly into your D piece. But I would say at least for your first one, try it out, see if you like it. I think they add something really nice to your bags, and why not give it a try, especially if you haven't done it before. Last for my outside pieces are K, and I've already gone ahead and trimmed these as per the template and the pattern. So I have 2 sets. You'll see I've got kind of 2 wrong sides together. These are going to go on either side. Again, this is for the sling version, which I will show you, and I will also show you the crossbody version. I do have a sample of that, which I'll show you when we start talking about these different pieces. I have 2 pieces for my L. That's going to be for my lining. I've chosen waterproof canvas, so I don't have any interfacing. This has that rubbery kind of a backing to it. If you are using cotton for your L pieces, I would suggest that you interface them. If you want to use waterproof canvas, water resistant canvas, or any other heavier fabric, because the bag is so small, I think you're fine to skip the interfacing. Inside this bag, there are no pockets, so I wasn't really concerned about really what I used inside. I'm getting most of my structure from the cork outside. And again, it's a small bag, so I'm not super concerned with my structure. It doesn't need to be like a sturdy stand-up kind of a bag, if that makes any sense. And my last piece right here is piece M. M is going to be on the back of the pocket here. So M is going to finish this pocket. Now, when you're looking at this zippered pocket, you'll see that there is no finishing to it. The zippered pocket does not have a separate lining. Because it's a small bag and because of the structure of this, I didn't feel that it was necessary to add yet another piece of fabric and do your standard turnstile zipper. So because we're using cork, which doesn't fray, I just added my zipper right to the back. I cut my opening directly and I added this piece of fabric to finish up the pocket. If you want to make this into a standard zippered pocket, especially if cotton is what you're using for D, you can do that as well. I tried to make this a simplified pattern, even though it has a lot of different things going on. Sometimes when you have all these different accessories and different pockets and things, when you get into even some of the basic things like a standard zippered pocket or inside pockets, it just gets a little bit too complex. So I wanted the outside of my bag to really be the star here. So now that we have those pieces, let's talk about zippers and hardware. We have 2 zippers for this bag. There is a smaller zipper, which is going to be on the back pocket, and there is a longer zipper for the top. Now, this shorter zipper, if it's a little bit longer than it needs to be, is totally fine. You do have measurements provided in the pattern. This top zipper right here, you will want to make sure that this is the exact size that the pattern says. This one, we don't have the same wiggle room because of the finishing technique with the tabs. If your zipper is too long, it's going to make the finishing steps harder. If it's too short, it's going to leave you with a gap. If you're off a tiny bit, like I wouldn't stress if it was off by 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch, but you really just want to be careful that it's as close to the size in the pattern as it says. As for my hardware, I have 2 swivel hooks, 2 D-rings, and a slide. These are all in 1/2 inch. That is going to make the tabs and the removable adjustable handle. I also grabbed a handmade tag, and I will talk about placement. On the sew along, we put our tag on the back here, which is a great place. For today's video, we're going to put it on the flap. That way you can see the different placements. I also have some rivets here. Now, this is the first pattern that I have ever written rivets into the construction part. Typically, my patterns are made completely on your machine. There's no call for having rivets in the patterns. But this one, because we do have cork outside or possibly vinyl, depending on your choices, and because some of these areas can get a little bit thick and a little bit awkward sometimes, like the sewing on here sometimes doesn't go exactly as planned. It's kind of hard to explain right now, but sometimes it can be a little tricky with this very small part that you're sewing, and you're sewing through thick layers, and then you also have the opportunity to add your tabs right here. It can get to be a little bit much, and I think rivets make this a lot easier. I think it also gives it a lot more stability to it. Sometimes our sewing is just not going to give us the stability that we need, and really give us what we need to hold all of our things. Because even though this is a small bag, if you're anything like me, you are loading this bag up and putting way too many things in here. And the last thing you want to do is break your tab or break your strap. So I did include rivets. I'm using 8mm double cap rivets. Since I am going to be using those, I also have my rivet setter. I'm using my handheld today with my rivet dies in there. And I have my handheld punch. That way I have those kind of all ready to go. That's really it for hardware. If you'll notice on this bag right here, I did use a fashion snap, as I mentioned. There are 2 different closure options included in the pattern. There is the fashion snap, and then there is the 18mm snap right here. If you are choosing to do something different, you absolutely can. I am using this size snap because it's what was included in the project box, which is where this pattern originated from. It was exclusive to that box for a period of time, and this is the size that was written in. If you want to use a smaller snap, a twist lock, a thumb lock, anything that you want, you can do that. You just might have to make some alterations or play with your placement. Unfortunately, because there's so many options, I couldn't put all of them into the pattern, and obviously I can't do all of them in the video. So since I did this version in the sew along, I'm going to do the magnetic snap, which I think for a lot of people is more accessible. Not everyone has the right tools for these types of snaps. I'm going to do this in the video, and then you can refer to the pattern for both options. The original Linda that was made by my friend Linda, who helped in the designing of this, she used twist locks for this. They look fabulous, but one note that she made is that sometimes it can be a little hard with the final sewing and turning because you end up having part of your twist lock right here. So she said it's definitely doable, but it can make things a little bit more challenging. So we've got our hardware and our zippers. I am going to be sewing on my HD9 today, which is my standard or my heavy duty straight stitch machine. So for that machine, I like to use these organ needles. These are the HLX5. These are a 9014. If you're sewing on your domestic, the Microtex 9014 needles are my preferred for cork. So I really like those for bag making and especially for cork. I have 3 feet here, and these are the ones that I'm going to be using. If you have a domestic, you'll want to get some similar feet for yourself. I have a 1/4 inch foot, and I also have an 1/8 inch foot. These are compensating feet, so they do have a spring on the side here. I absolutely love these feet, and I use them all the time. I really can't sew without them. On my domestic machine, I would use my 1/4 inch foot that's made for quilting. And for the 1/8 inch, I would use my blind hem foot and move my needle position to the left. I've talked about that in a few other videos that you can refer to if you need it, or drop me a comment and I'm happy to give you some more information. The last foot that I have here is my very thin cording foot. I find that when I'm putting in my zipper right here on the back, I think that foot works the best to get around it and it doesn't give me any issues. For thread, I have a Tex 45. This is a polyester thread. I love this peachy color and I think it's going to look great on the 3 different corks that I have. Since I'm using my HD9, I like to use a little bit heavier polyester. On my standard domestic, I would probably use a 40 weight, somewhere in there, either a polyester or a cotton, whichever you prefer. For my basic tools, of course, I have my ruler and rotary cutter. That's how I did all of my trimming. I have my scissors. I do have my turning tool, which I'm going to use for my flap, which has a seam ripper on the other end because I'm probably going to need that at some point. I have a marking tool. All of my corks had light enough backs that just one was fine. I don't need a chalk pencil for today. And I also have 1/8 inch tape. This is double-sided tape. This is going to be very crucial for a lot of the steps. I've come to be very addicted to this tape and I really don't use much else. I don't like the 1/4 inch tape as much anymore now that I started using 1/8. A lot of times it will stay out of the seam allowance, or because it's so thin, it's not a big deal if I'm sewing through it. Sometimes when you sew through too much of the tape, you'll end up getting a lot of residue and you'll have some issues with your needle. This seems to work really well. The brand that I am using is from Wawak or Wawak, however you prefer to say it. It's WAWAK.com. This is their standard tape and I have a million rolls of it because I use it all the time. Okay, so I've got all of my things here. Oh, my clips, of course. Those are a standard at this point. So now that I've got all of my things, we're gonna jump right into the pattern and start discussing our next step. Step 1 of our pattern is going to talk about the cutting and fusing as well as using your templates. And since we've already done that, we're gonna go ahead and skip right past step 1. I've got my I, my J, and my K all trimmed with my templates. Those are in the back of your pattern. So since those are done, I'm just gonna put them aside. For step 2, we're going to start making our handle and our tabs. First, we're going to take our 2 F pieces and we're going to sew them and then trim off 1/4 inch. And then you're going to press or use your 1/8 inch tape to hold that seam open. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my tape. And what I like to do is just, mostly because I just don't feel like turning the iron on right now, I will avoid the iron at all costs, especially when it's warm out. So I'm just going to put my tape right here on either side of my seam. I'll take the paper off and then I will just use that to hold my seam flat. I find that that works just as well for me and I don't have to turn on the iron. So I'm just going to take that, press with my finger, and just like that, I have a nice flat seam. So now that I have this really long F piece, this is going to become my removable strap. I'm going to show you how to prep it. For this handle, I've chosen to do a trifold. I like how that looks, and I also like how it feels, especially with a thin handle like this. This handle is going to be a 1/2 inch finished, so 2 layers of cork to me just doesn't feel substantial enough when it's that thin. So I'm going to grab my ruler and my pen, my marking tool, and on the back here, I'm going to mark a 1/2 inch in. And I'm going to draw a line all the way down. I'll just show you a little bit. But what I like to do is just line that up, draw my line, and I'm going to keep drawing all the way down. Draw my 1/2 inch line all the way down. And what you're doing is giving yourself a place to start your fold. Because my handle is a 1/2 inch finished, this line is a 1/2 inch in. It's also 1/3 of the width of this piece. If your handle was 1 inch, this line would be 1 inch, etc. So now that I have that drawn all the way down my entire handle, I'm going to take some tape and I'm going to press my tape right on the opposite side, just like this, all the way down. Once I have that tape on there, I'm going to start folding this edge in first. So I'll take my paper off and I'm going to fold this almost to that line. I don't want to overlap the line by any means, but I want to get kind of close to it. For me, I like to still be able to see the line just a little bit. So there's my line right there. And now I'm going to use some clips and I'm going to fold the opposite side right over. And this should come right to the edge, but not coming off of the edge. We want to make sure that we've got enough room for our 1/8 inch seam or our 1/8 inch top stitching to grab it, but we don't want it hanging over the edge. So once I get that all set, I'll do that down the entire length of the handle. Now I have a raw edge that's kind of hidden on what I call the back. The front is nice and clean and has 2 folded edges and it's ready for top stitching. Now I'm a huge fan of double top stitching, but on something this small, a 1/2 inch, a single top stitch is just fine. So I'm going to do an 1/8 inch down either side. That's going to become my handle, and once I'm done, I'll be ready for hardware. I'm going to set that aside for just a minute because while I'm at the machine, I'm also going to do some other prep work. I've grabbed my G tabs right here and I also have my H. Now, if I was using the fashion snap, I would be doing my top stitching right now. Because I am doing a magnetic snap, I'm going to do something a little bit different. So I am going to address that in just a second. Just wanted to kind of remind you to check your pattern because there's 2 different types of hardware talked about. So if you're doing the smaller piece for your H and you're doing a fashion tab or fashion snap, you're going to top stitch this as well. Since I'm not, I'm just going to set that aside for a minute. For my G tabs, which I'm going to use for either my crossbody style or the sling style, and let me grab that just so I can show you what I mean. So I've taken the handles off of both of these just so they're a little bit easier to look at. So this sample right here has the K connector tabs. These are going to be when you want to wear your bag as either a belt bag or a sling bag. You're going to be adding the G's onto those pieces. If that's not the style that you want to do and you want to make it into a crossbody like this one, you're still going to make the same G tabs. They're just going to be attached in a different place without the K pieces. So for the G tabs, since I'm going over and doing my top stitching, I'm going to top stitch these as well. Again, an 1/8 inch on each side. Now these are not cut to be a tri-fold. These we're just going to fold in half. So we're just going to fold them like that. So they're a 1/2 inch long by 4 inches in height. We're just going to fold those and do our same top stitching on either side. Let's get our H tab prepared. As I mentioned earlier, because I am using the magnetic snap, we do have a larger piece for H, and we're going to do it a little bit differently. We're not going to just jump right into top stitching because we need to add half of our snap to this piece before we do top stitching, and then we'll do some trimming at the end. So this piece is generously cut. It is oversized for a reason, and it's so that you have different options for what foot you use, and we'll talk about that once we get the snap in, and I'll show you where to top stitch. So what I did is I made a line in the center. This is not necessary, but it just helps me to visualize. I want 2 distinct halves to my piece. Remember, the piece is taller than it is wider. So on this half, on my left side, on my lower half right here, I'm going to use my washer, and I'm going to place it towards the bottom and kind of roughly centered. Your washer should be approximately 3/16 of an inch up and kind of centered in the middle. It doesn't have to be perfect by any means. Again, this is oversized and we do have some room for trimming, but I just kind of place it like this. You're going to have a picture in your pattern that will show you as well and give you your measurements. So I'm just kind of eyeballing this. I haven't even grabbed my ruler, and I'm going to mark my 2 slits right here. I'm going to go ahead and grab my seam ripper. Just going to poke this in and back out and in and back out. I am using the male half of the snap. This is kind of the thinner half. I think it works a lot better for top stitching. I'm going to place that through here. I am not reinforcing this with any extra cork or anything. You can if you want to. I'm just going to use the washer that was provided. So I'm going to place my washer right on there, and I will fold my prongs inward. I love the end of this tool for this because I don't have to break my nails or hurt my fingers. Okay, so now that I have that in place, I'm going to take this to the machine and fold this in half just like that. You can add some tape or clips if it helps. And I'm going to stitch all the way around. And my goal is to stitch as close as I can get to the washer, or well, to the washer, but also to the snap. I'm probably going to use my cording foot because I find that a little bit easier. And if it helps you, take your heat erasable pen and your ruler and draw the lines where you want to sew, if that helps to get everything a little bit more even. Once I have that sewn, because it is kind of big and chunky, and that's not really the look I want, I will trim mine down a little bit. You can leave yours. Having a wide snap like this or a tab is not going to hurt anything. So I'm going to take my ruler right now. I'll just show you kind of what I mean, so it's a little bit easier to see. I want to get probably like an 1/8 to a 1/16 inch away from the snap as best as I can. And I'm just kind of eyeballing this right now because I'm not quite on the 1/4 inch line, but I'm not quite on the 3/8 line. I'm just kind of hovering in the middle there. And if I just do that very gently and lightly, it should give me a guideline and make it a little bit easier when the time comes to get to the sewing machine. Now when I fold this in half, I can follow those lines. I'll also do the top and the bottom. Those are a little bit easier. And then when I'm done, I can decide how much I want to trim off. So I'm going to head over and do a little stitching. I'll come back and show you how this looks, and then we'll do some trimming. To finish up step 2, I'm going to finish my little tab right here. This is my H tab. I added half of my magnet. My washer is inside. I folded it in half, and I've done my stitching as close to the magnet as I can get. Now that I've gotten that in there, I'm going to get rid of those lines that I drew they're making my thread not look like it's actually peach. It looks like it's a different color. So I'm just gonna get rid of those marks. And now I have two options. I can leave my tab exactly as is. I can use it in the bag just like this, or I can trim it down and get closer to where that stitching is. And I think I'm gonna trim it. Okay, I'm all trimmed. I went about 1/8 of an inch or so from my top stitching. Just kind of made that even. I try to make this as close to 1 inch in width as I can. I'm just going in and getting a little bit more of the pen mark that was kind of under some of my stitching. And this is going to be the back side that faces down. On this side that faces out, I had a little bit of a bird's nest. I still kind of do. I wasn't being super careful with my threads. So I just cleaned that up a little bit, got it as neat as I could. So now my H tab is all set. I can put this aside until a later step. Okay, so I've gone ahead and completed my top stitching on my F, which is my long handle. Those two pieces were sewn together first, and then I did my trifold. So this is what I would call the back. There's that little bit of raw edge right there that's still not hanging off of the edge. From the front, you can see I have 2 clean folded sides. I've done 1/8 inch on both sides. I don't feel it's necessary to do much more just because it's such a narrow handle. I also finished up my F tabs. I've got both of those just folded in half. So those will have a raw edge and a folded edge. If you would like to fold into the middle to avoid that, you absolutely can. I'm just kind of used to doing it this way. And whenever I get any little threads at the end or any little bit of fraying, I just run my lighter along those edges and it cleans them right up. That's why I also like using polyester thread. But you can run this right along the edge of your cork. So if you get anything like this little fuzzy, you just run that right along there. And sometimes I'll use my lighter or my finger to kind of smooth that out. So now that I've got all my top stitching done, I grabbed my hardware. I did grab some rivets for my handle. You can stitch yours. I'm going to rivet mine. It's a totally personal call. I just find that now that I use rivets, I use them as much as possible. Not because I'm trying to avoid sewing, but just because I really like how they look and I have them. So why not put them in, right? So first things first, we're going to take our 2 G tabs. We're not actually going to do much to them right now, except add a D-ring on. And the reason I do this is just so that I can set it aside and know where my hardware is. I'm going to rivet these at the end, whether I am adding them to the sling version or the crossbody. So for right now, I don't feel the need to do anything. I just want to make sure that when the time comes that I know where my D-rings are and that I don't forget to put them on. Ask me how I know about that. So those are my tabs. I'm going to set those aside. I'm done with G for right now. So for my F handle, I'm going to, again, use rivets. I'll show you where you would stitch if you were going to sew yours. First thing we're going to do is take one of our short ends, and I like to just clean it up a little bit just in case anything has moved or shifted. I'm going to take my little slide right here. Now, these are little details that I know mean a lot to you, so I also want to show you up close. They do mean a lot to me, but sometimes I am a little careless and don't overthink things. So I'm holding my slide so that the clean edge is facing up. There's the back side where those pieces are kind of bent. So I'm holding it with the bar in between my fingers. I'm stabilizing it. My handle has the right side facing up. There is my edge, my kind of folded edge in the back. I'm going to go up and I'm going to come back over the center bar. Very simple, just like that. And I'm going to slide this down, I would say maybe about 1 inch in total. Because this will be hidden when it's done, I'm just going to use 1 rivet. You can use 2, but I find that 1 is just fine. If you're sewing, you'll want to sew about 1/8 inch from this short edge, and you'll want to stitch a few times back and forth to secure it. So I'm just going to punch a hole first. I'm using the ProMaster punch. I purchased this on Amazon. I really like how this one works, and I'm using the 2.5 setting. I'm going to put my hole, I don't know, about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch from the edge, just enough to make sure my rivet is not hanging off the end. Punch through all 6 of those layers. I'm gonna grab my rivet and put that through. I'm being very clumsy today. There we go. And put my cap on. And now I'm going to grab my rivet setter. I've got my dies already in, and just check and make sure that's seated correctly and punch that in place. Okay, so now what we're gonna do, very important, is we're gonna fold our handle in half like this because we're checking to make sure that nothing is twisted. We don't want any twists on our handle. The first thing we're gonna do, and I just kind of hold these ends like this, I'm gonna take one of my swivels facing out, away, and that's going to hang loose. I'm gonna leave that one alone. Now I'm gonna take this edge, I am gonna clean this up a little bit, and I'm gonna go back up and over the center of where the cork already is. So I'm gonna go up, and I'm gonna pull this one a little bit and back over. And now I have my handle. There's my end. There's the center. No twists. My swivel hook is gonna stay loose. And I'm gonna take swivel hook number 2 and put that on, and I'm gonna add 2 rivets. I am totally just eyeballing this. I would say that I have about 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches overhang. I'm not gonna mark this at all. I'm just gonna kind of go for it. So I'm gonna put my first one closer towards the end, maybe about 1/2 inch in. Make sure everything is lined up. I don't want my holes to be crooked. I'll put that one there. And I am going to add the rivet because it helps to hold everything together. Before I set it, I can just pop that on there. And now for my next one, I'm going to get closer to the swivel hook. And let's see, I'm probably about 1/2 inch from the swivel. Punch my hole. And there we go. All right, so we'll go ahead and set those. Your double cap rivets will snap together, but they're not gonna stay together. So that's why you need to set them with some sort of a tool, whether it's a hand tool or the tabletop press or even a hammer and that type of rivet tool. So now I have my handle all done. That's how it's looking on this end. And because this is removable, I'm done with it for now. So until the bag is finished, I don't need this. I can set this aside and I'm completely finished. For step 3, we're going to start building our credit card pockets. This is going to be the front of the bag that's underneath the flap. So here is my flap. I'm going to be building this section right here. So I've already gone ahead and done some top stitching. What I like to do is on one long edge of each piece. And if you have directional cork, this would be the top of whatever you have that's directional. Kind of like I have here. I did my top edge. You're just going to do an 1/8 inch top stitching along each of those. And it's just to make it look nice and finished. So I have 2 purple. I did a row on each of those and I did my print here. On my A piece, this is going to be the front. I have 2 different colors for mine. And because my flap is actually out of my print, I chose to do the solid color. Even though these are going to blend a little bit, I'm okay with that because my flap will stand out later. So I've already gone ahead and found the center and I made my first mark as per the measurement in the pattern. You do not have to use a pen of any kind. You don't have to make marks. You can just use your ruler. Just for the camera's sake, it was easier for me to draw a line right here. So in the pattern, it's going to tell you how far down to place your first pocket. And on the back of each of these, I added a row of tape on the opposite side from where I top stitched. So I top stitch on the top, I added tape on the bottom on the wrong side. Make sure that tape's on the wrong side because we're not turning these. So I'm going to get that paper off. And I'm going to place my first one. I just have to pull this a little closer to me. Not always easy with the camera. And I'm just going to place that on my marks. So in the pattern, it's providing a measurement down. It also wants you to put these 2 pieces centered. Centered also means about 1 inch on each side. So it's not too bad. It's whatever is easier for you. So now that I have this one in place, I'm going to head to the machine and stitch 1/4 inch right across here. That's all I'm going to do. Once I've done 1/4 inch on that one, I'm going to place my second card pocket 1/2 inch down from the first and sew it 1/4. And I'm going to place my third card pocket 1/2 inch down and sew 1/4 inch along the bottom. I've got my 3 credit card pockets sewn in. I found my measurement, I found my center, and I used the measurement in the pattern for my first one. I'm always measuring from the top of A to the top of the card pocket. Along the bottom edge, I sewed 1/4 inch. I placed my second one 1/2 inch down from the first one using my ruler. Again, sewed 1/4 inch. And then I placed my third one 1/2 inch down from the second, or 1 inch from the top one, whichever is easier to measure. I've got those all sewn in place on the bottom. They're all even here. So the last bit of sewing I'm going to do to finish these up is I'm going to do 1/8 inch all the way down the side, across the bottom, and back up. I think it looks really nice and neat and professional. So I don't need to do the 1/8 inch on the bottom, but I think it looks good. So again, down, across, and back up. And then I'm going to find and mark my center, and I'm going to stitch the center to create 6 pockets. As you can see here on the finished one, there's my stitching line, and I've got 6 credit card pockets. What I like to do when I'm sewing is start down here. I stitch up to the top of the pocket, I turn, I come back down, and I stop at the bottom. My credit card pockets are all done. I stitched the sides as well as the bottom. I also found the center, and I stitched up and then back down, making sure that I have those nice and secure. And now I have 6 separate credit card pockets. For step 4, we're going to start preparing our ID window. I apologize at the beginning of the video. I did forget to mention that you do need a clear ID window. Maybe I went back and edited that. Maybe. We'll see if I'm good this day when I'm editing. So I've got my eyepiece. I've already trimmed the inside out. So I'm just going to trim the center as per the template that's included. And I have my ID window here. My ID window, I'm pretty sure, is larger than this, even though it should be the same size, but that's okay. We can trim it. So what I'm going to do first, before I do any stitching, is I'm going to put tape on the back here and add my window. So I'm just going to take a little bit of tape. You don't have to go crazy with it. It's just to keep things from moving. And I'm going to put a little bit on the top and the bottom. I think that's going to be sufficient for now. And I'm going to peel that paper off. Now my ID window has paper on the back and the shiny side on the front. I'm going to place it shiny side up, and I'm going to put my ID window out of cork right on top. And I way overcut this window, but that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and trim that up just a little bit. We don't want any of the plastic or the vinyl, excuse me, hanging out from the edge. So just go ahead and trim. Okay. So now that that is in place, I can take my paper off. I do like to sew with the paper off. If you want to sew with the paper on, if it makes it easier, you can. The only thing to keep in mind is that you're going to have to rip that paper off at some point, and you don't want to pull on your stitches. So you'll want to really be careful how hard you tug on that. I used to always sew with the paper on, and I just found that I actually have an easier time with it off. It doesn't stick to my machine as much as I thought it was going to. So now that I have that ready, I'm going to head to the machine and do some 1/8 inch top stitching. Here's my ID window right here. This is how it goes into the flap. So you see this is the open part. So the first thing I'm going to do is stitch around the inside of the window, all the way around the inside 1/8 inch. And then I'm going to add top stitching just here on the bottom, right here. And the reason is, once it's in here, that's the side that's open. We're not going to want to stitch that down. So if you don't do top stitching, that's fine. It looks like I actually didn't on this one, and that's totally okay. Let's check this one. All right, perfect. This one I did. So this is the open edge. So I just top stitch here just to give it a finished look. Then when it's sewn in and the rest of that stitching is done, it looks complete. Again, it's obviously optional. I didn't do it in this sample, but it's something I like to do. So before I can add my ID window to my flap, I need to decide if I want to add some shape to it. As you can see here in the finished sample, I made the corners a 45-degree angle. I really like how that looks. If you prefer to leave them straight, you absolutely can. If you want to cut a curve, this is really a personal choice. It's whatever you want to do. So if you are using directional cork, be very aware of what ends you cut. When I cut my front, I cut the 2 bottom corners. And when I cut the back piece where the ID window is, I cut the 2 top corners. I have directional cork on this one, so I wanted to make sure that when I turned my flap up, it wasn't upside down. For this one, for today, it doesn't matter. I have both of my circles here, and those are not directional. What I'm gonna do is make my marks and cut with my ruler and rotary cutter. So I'm gonna clip these together, and I'm gonna be marking both of the bottom edges, which I've already done. So all I did is I took my ruler and I marked up and over the same measurement. I chose 1 inch. You can do a little less if you want to. I probably wouldn't go much more just because you don't want to see the end of your credit card pocket sticking out. So I think 1 inch is totally fine. You could do 3/4 if you wanted a little bit less. So I measured up and over and I just drew my line just like that. I used my rotary cutter and I gave that a little bit of a trim. I like to cut through both layers at once because then I can do it a little bit quicker. And also if I line this up and cut it, if my measurement or my angle is off even a little bit, I don't have to worry about that later. It happens to the best of us. I think it happened during the sew along where my angles were not quite 45. Maybe one was 43 and one was 47. Who knows? But they were not exactly the same. So by doing it this way, when these two pieces get sewn at a later step, they're going to line up nicely. So now that these are cut, let's add our ID window to one of them. Now that my ID window is top stitched around the window as well as this edge right down here, I'm going to place it on my flap. I went ahead and found the center of my flap as well as the center of my ID window. I used a little bit of tape and I placed that as per the measurements in the pattern. I did draw a line from the bottom edge here. You can just use your ruler. Now that I have that in place, I'm not going to stitch down here where I have that extra top stitching. That's going to be the open side. I'm going to stitch the side across the top and back down the side 1/8 of an inch, but different. So I'm not going to do any measurements. I'm just going to kind of eyeball mine. So I'm going to use my finished one right here and just see if it makes a huge difference. Where do I want to put it? Do I want it in the corner? I think I might put it over here. So I know that I'm going to need 1/4 of an inch seam allowance all the way around. So I don't want to put it too close. And I'm thinking if I put it about right there, I'm going to guesstimate I'm about 1 inch to 1.25 inches from the side and the bottom. That sounds good to me. I'm just eyeballing it here. And if I don't like it, well, it's mine. I'll live with it. So let me hold that on there. Make sure that that looks straight, hopefully. And I want to mark the inside, 1 in from each end. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I like to fold my prongs inward. It's just how I've always done it. If you like to fold them outwards, you are more than welcome to. All right, so there is my handmade tag. I think it looks pretty good. All right, I've got my ID window stitched in place. I'm just gonna get rid of these marks that I don't need now. Okay, so my ID window is in place. I also added my handmade tag to the outside here. So I'm gonna take these two pieces and place them right sides together, just like this. I'll use a few clips. And I'm going to stitch 1/4 of an inch around all the sides except this long top edge. That's gonna stay open. Whether you are adding a fashion snap or a magnetic snap like I am, you're going to do this next part exactly the same. Once we turn it right side out and do some top stitching, that's when we will be ready to add the half of the magnet that we have waiting. If you're adding a fashion snap, you'll follow those directions in the pattern. So I'm going to head back to the machine. I'm going to stitch 1/4 of an inch around all the way up to here, leaving this top edge open. My flap is all sewn together, and before I turn it right side out and do my top stitching, I did just want to show you what I do for my corners. This is also noted in the pattern, but I like to trim away about half of the cork, cut my seam allowance down to about 1/8 of an inch. I find that this really helps when I'm turning to get nice smooth corners. I also take my index finger and my thumb and kind of grab a hold of the corner and poke that out with my fingernail. I do the same over here just to get it started. And then I'll come over here and do the same. Piece it too much. I will take my turning tool and just kind of run it in the corner, kind of smoothing that out just to be sure it's as smooth and poked out as possible before I do my top stitching. So once I do that, I can either take it over to the ironing board, or what I'll do right now is just add a couple of clips right on the seam allowance. And I find that that really helps to keep everything smooth. Oops, I just threw that one across the table. And then I can do my top stitching. So regardless of what kind of closure you're going to use, you are going to want to top stitch first. So I'm going to take this back to the machine and do my 1/8 inch top stitching. If you are doing a fashion snap, you can also sew across the top edge here just to keep that closed. It'll make it a little bit easier when you add it onto the A piece. If you are doing a magnetic snap like I am, don't close that up. We need to leave that open so we can add our snap. So I'm going to head over to the machine, do my top stitching, and then I'll come back and we'll put the other half of the snap in. My flap is all top stitched. I did my 1/8 of an inch on the sides and the bottom. I did not sew this open long edge. If you are doing the magnetic snap like I'm about to add, you don't want to sew that closed because you'll need access there. So now that my flap is all top stitched, I did the sides as well as the bottom here. I left the top edge open. That is very important for adding the magnetic snap because if we close that, we wouldn't have access. And because the magnetic snaps, unlike the fashion snaps, have this washer, we really want to hide that. When you look at this sample right here that I added the fashion snap to, we're going to be punching a hole all the way through for this style, this as well as a twist lock or a flip lock, depending on what you want to use. So it's totally fine if I had closed that top edge for this style. For the magnet, not so much. We definitely want to have that open so we can hide this washer. So what we're going to do here is on the back side, this is where the snap is going to go. I found my center down underneath my ID window. My ID window is open up here because when it's in the purse, it's actually going to go like this. I'm just turning it this way towards myself. So I'm on my finished edge. I'm going to take the washer and my marking tool, put that right in the center. And I don't care if the washer overlaps a little bit on the ID window. What I don't want is to overlap it on the top stitching because then the magnet is not going to be able to sit properly. So you want to just kind of mark in those two little slits right there. I'm going to put my hand through here so I only cut through one layer and get my seam ripper. And I'm going to just poke in and poke out. In and out. I've got my hand in here. I'm going to place my washer and my magnet. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to get rid of these marks, do it a little bit easier. Put that right through there. That's how that's sitting. It's touching the ID window, which is totally fine. And I'm just going to kind of turn this like so. Add my washer. And I'm going to use this end of my turning tool to flatten that out. I like to bend my prongs inward. It's the way I've always done it. So now I have that in place. Now I can keep going and finish up the outside front of my bag. For step 5, we're going to add our finished flap onto the front A, which has the credit card pockets. So above the top of the credit card pockets, this is where they open, I made a mark as per the pattern, and I drew a line, keeping the line within the confines of the credit card pockets. I do have a removable pen, but just in case you're using something that doesn't remove, you don't want your marks to go past the credit cards. I'm going to take my tape and place it right on top of that line. And of course, I'm placing this on the top part. So I'm going up towards the top of A, and I'm also making sure it stays, again, within the credit card pockets. So I'm going to use that tape to hold my flap in place. I'm going to take my flap and I'm going to center it right on top of that line, just like that. Looks pretty centered. I'm gonna double check here. Yep, that looks really centered. Sometimes I eyeball it, sometimes I get my ruler out, kind of depends on the day. So I'm placing my flap right on that line. My ID window opens here. It's facing towards me as well as my snap. Now I'm ready to go ahead and stitch right across here. I'm going to sew 1/8 of an inch to hold that in place. Once I have that in place, I'm going to fold this down and I'm going to stitch 1/4 of an inch, and that's going to enclose the raw edge. So as you can see right here, when I look underneath, I still have a pen mark, which I didn't take out, but my raw edge is kind of tucked in. I stitched 1/8 and I pulled my flap down so it covered the credit card pockets. Then I stitched 1/4 of an inch and that hid everything. So I'm gonna go to the machine and do that with this piece. To finish up step 5, we're going to add the other half of the magnet. So I have my flap sewn in place, it's centered, I sewed it 1/8 of an inch, folded it down and sewed 1/4 of an inch. Here's another little tip for you as well. This part right here on each end can be a little bit thick, and your machine wants to sew into thickness more than it wants to start off of it, and kind of the needle gets stuck, or sometimes it just doesn't want to go. If this is too thick, you can sew just the center part of it, avoiding those seams, and add a couple of rivets. It's not going to hurt anything. So in order to find the placement for the second half of our snap, what I like to do is take my snap and I just snap that together. And what I'm going to do is place my flap carefully right where I want it, and I'll kind of just push down, and then I can see my little prong marks. Hard for you to see, but I can definitely see them. So now I've got my little marks right there. I don't even need my washer really. I'm going to take my seam ripper again. Oops. And cut my slits. If you feel like you want to reinforce this with a little scrap of cork, you absolutely can. I'm just going to use the washer that it came with. And put my magnet right there. Put that down. Again, fold my prongs inward. And now I have a nicely centered magnet. So this piece is all done. I'm going to set this aside. I am all finished with my credit card pockets, my ID window, my flap. This is a big bulk of the project here. So I'm going to set this aside and we're going to move on for our next step. For step 6, we're going to start preparing our back pocket with the zipper and the overlay. So I have piece D, this is my back pocket. I have my J overlay, my zipper, and of course my M piece. This will be the final piece, but I have it nearby. So for the zipper on this bag, we've got a little zippered pocket in the back right here. It's actually not so little, it's actually a pretty good size. We're going to create this first before we end up finishing with our fabric. So first things first, I added some tape onto the back of J. I also found the center of J and the center of D, and I used the measurement provided in the pattern. You can use your ruler. I used a heat erasable pen as I've been doing, and I'm going to place this centered right at that line, just like so. Now the technique that I'm using to do this is actually the opposite of what I normally do. If you've done any of my other recessed zippers, or excuse me, not recessed, zippered pockets with overlays. There's so many things going on, I can't keep it straight. If you've done any of my other zippered pockets with overlays, my steps are usually the opposite. But I learned this technique from my friend Nicole from Sonar, and this is how she does her zipper overlays. And I was helping her in a class and watching her do it, and I thought, wow, that is mind-blowing that I never thought about doing it that way. We get to the same end, but we do it in totally opposite ways. And I just thought it was such a cool way that I would borrow it from her and I would try it out for this pattern. So it really doesn't matter how you do it, as long as you get to the right end result. What difference does it make, right? But we might as well learn different techniques as we go. So for this, I'm all set to take this to the machine. Before I do anything with my zipper or anything else, I need to stitch my overlay in place. I'm only going to be stitching the outside for right now, and I'm going to do 1/8 of an inch all the way around. For the next part of this step, now that I have my zipper overlay sewn in place, I'm going to remove the part that's in the center here, just the D. I am not going to take any of the overlay away. So what I like to do is just kind of go in here with my scissors, get that started, and I'll run my scissors underneath the overlay. This does not have to be neat. It just has to get rid of that bulk because the overlay is going to be the part that shows on top of the zipper. So if we just go ahead and remove, you can work from the front or the back, whatever is easier. And as long as you have a neat opening from the front, it doesn't matter what the back looks like. My backs are never neat, and that's totally fine because no one's gonna see that. So now that I have that done, I'm gonna grab my lighter and just get rid of these marks that I had because I don't need those anymore. And I'm gonna get my zipper and my tape. Got a few more. And on the back side here, I'm going to add some tape. Don't overthink it. You kind of have an uneven surface to work with here, but it will all be just fine. You have plenty of zipper tape to catch. So just get that in there. And then we're going to take our paper off. And place my zipper, opening to the left. Put that right side up. The zipper pull is kind of big, and when you have a big pull like that, sometimes you have to kind of work around it. So what I'll do is just get this started here and then grab my zipper pull and then kind of work my zipper, and I'll move that down to the end. And I just move it with my fingernail. And now that I have it where I want, I can go to the machine and I can stitch the inside now. So I've already stitched the outside. Now I'm going to do the inside 1/8 of an inch. And for this stitching, I'm going to use that cording foot. I find that that narrow foot really helps to get around. I'm going to go just around once. You can reinforce the ends if you want to. Once I have that done, since I'm already at the machine, I'm going to take my M piece with me. M is not interfaced. The reason I did that is to reduce bulk, but also because when I open this, I don't want to see the interfacing. I'd rather see the backside of my fabric. So that's why I think that solids or Essex linens or anything that doesn't have a distinctive front and back works the best for this. Once the zipper is sewn in, I'm going to place this right sides together, and I'm going to stitch the top edge only 1/4 of an inch using my 1/4 of an inch foot, making sure to back stitch. I'm going to turn it open and I'm going to top stitch. And when I sew this, I'm also going to sew with the cork on top. That is going to help prevent stretching. So when this pocket is all done, I will have my top stitch edge right here. And behind that, I've got my finished piece of fabric. When I open up my zipper, I've got a nice pocket. It's technically looking at the wrong side of the fabric, but you really can't tell. So in order to make these tabs, these are actually not going to be turned right side out. You can see these tabs right here have raw edges. So in the pattern, it's going to show you how to add your pieces right here. And it's going to tell you when you're ready to sew all the way around. And when I get this lined up and I show you, I'll show you a little trick that I actually learned from one of my pattern testers. And it's something that she does because her machine in particular is not a fan of going over a large, thick area. She kind of gets some skip stitches and she doesn't like how it looks. So I'm going to show you 2 options because I've done it both ways and I'm totally fine with either way. And I think I actually have both outcomes on samples. I'll grab another sample and show you in just a second. So what I have here is my 2 sets of K. They are going to go wrong sides together, so I'm adding tape to the wrong side of one. I'm going to do a little bit of sewing, and I'm also going to do some riveting to make these tabs. I like to do both just because I think it's going to look a lot neater when you have the pieces sewn together, but I also think the rivets are adding some durability and structure That way, when we're wearing this, we're not worried about overloading the bag and ripping something, because that is the worst feeling ever. When you feel your handle rip, oh, it's the worst. So I've got these lined up here. My E's, these are my little, or my G's, excuse me. These are my little G tabs that we made earlier. We have the D-ring, but it's not actually in place yet. So for now, I'm gonna kind of slide my clip up to here to hold that. I've got this folded in half, just like so. And I'm gonna do the same thing here. I'm gonna grab a few more clips. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to have the D-ring kind of hanging off the edge. I'm on the short, straight edge. And your tab should be hanging out 3/4 to an inch. You don't want it too far out, but you don't want it too far in either. So roughly 3/4 to an inch. Now I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to use my tape here and also use a couple clips and hold this in place so I can get it to the machine. And before I take it to the machine, I'll show you your options for sewing, and then we'll do some rivets when we're done. So I'm gonna do the same thing over here, and now I try to match them as best as I can. So just kind of take a look there. I feel like this one isn't out as far. That looks pretty good. They don't have to be perfect, but it's going to stand out to me if one is a lot further out than the other. So I'm trying to get them as even as I can. Okay, add some clips. So let me grab this sample. This is one of the first samples that I did. And in this sample, I stitched 1/8 all the way around, including this edge right here. And I didn't have any issues with it. Even though I am going across a fine piece right here, this is a short little edge, and I'm going through an extra 4 layers of cork. I'm kind of going up and over it. Sometimes machines want to skip stitches and they don't like that. If you are finding that that's the case for you, you don't have to sew right there. When you're sewing, you can actually just sew your other sides and you can skip that side altogether, just like I did here. Whatever makes you happier, whatever works for your machine, don't fight it. So I'm going to head to my machine. I'll probably decide when I get there what I want to do, but I'm going to sew at the minimum from here down, across, and back up. If I do across here, that's fine. And if I don't, that's also fine. When I'm done, especially if I don't sew across here, I'm going to add some rivets to anchor my tabs in. So I'll add one over here to really make sure my D-ring doesn't move, and I'll add 1 or 2 here to anchor that in place. My K-tabs are all set. I stitched 1/8 of an inch all the way around. I did go over the little short end here. I wasn't sure if I was going to or not. I like going over it because I like the consistency, but sometimes things like this happen where you get that little skip stitch because you're coming off of the thickness. You can try using a hump jumper if that helps. Before I add any of my rivets on to finish these up, I'm just going to do a little bit of trimming. I just like to see where it has shifted. So right here, I can see that my one piece is sticking out a little further than the other. So I'm just going to trim that. This side right here is actually going to be sewn into a seam, so I'm not going to worry about it. This side looks pretty good, and this one looks good. Let's take a look here. This one shifted a little bit as well. So we'll just trim to even that up. This is the nice thing about the raw edge, and it doesn't matter if they are perfect or not. I don't really need to trim there just because that's going to go into a seam. I will trim right there and a little bit on the top. All right, I think that looks pretty good. So to finish this up, I'm going to add some rivets. I'm going to grab my rivets here, if I can find them, and my rivet setter. I've lost half my rivets. Oh, they're right in front of me. Look in the most logical place, right in front of your face. Okay, so for my tabs here, I think I'm just going to do 1 here and 1 here. 1 on the K and 1 on the G. I'm going to eyeball it as I do pretty much everything else. Hope for the best. I've gotten pretty good at eyeballing, which I probably shouldn't say until I'm done and I mess it up. If you don't want to add rivets to this step, I would definitely sew that short end. I would not leave that open. And I would reinforce it a few times to really make sure that your tab is not going anywhere. But I highly encourage you, especially here, even if nowhere else, to use rivets, because I think it's just going to make this a lot easier, and it's going to make this step a lot more secure. So now that these are done, I'm going to set them aside until I get to step 9. For step 8, we're going to start by adding our snap tab. Once this is sewn in place, we'll be ready to add the finished zippered pocket. So I have my remaining A piece. This is the one that does not have credit cards. I found the center, and I also measured up as per the information in the pattern. I made a few marks here so I can place my snap tab, and I've got a little bit of tape on the back. So I'm going to just take that paper off. And my snap tab is going to go with the snap facing up, and I'm going to center it right there. So it should be equal distance here and the same measurement as provided in the pattern. Once that is in place, I do like to mark mine before sewing it because I just think it's a little bit easier. But I'm going to go up about 1 inch to 3/4 of an inch. And I'm going to also make an X here. And I just give myself a little guideline. At my machine, I'm going to sew around this box that I just drew right here. And I'm also going to stitch the X. Once that's complete, we can go ahead and add our pocket. So we've got our snap tab sewn in place. Once this is complete, it's time to add the pocket on. Before I do that, I'm just going to go ahead and remove my marks. I don't need those now. So let's go ahead and finish up the back part now that we have our tab in place. I've got my finished pocket. I'm just going to place that on top, lining up the sides and the bottom. It is going to be shorter than the back piece. So this is your D pocket and your A. At the sewing machine, I'm just going to base this 1/8 of an inch all the way around just to make sure that it stays put. So now that we've gotten our pocket stitched in place, it's just basted around the edges and our snap is in, we have to put the other half of our magnet in. Now this part is going to go inside of the pocket. So we're going to work just through this layer, but it's fine because we can open up the zipper to access it. So what I'm going to do is fold this snap down, and I want to just kind of find where my center is. I'm not pulling this tab really tight. I don't want it over the zipper. I want to kind of back it up a little bit so that it's right to the edge or not past the edge of the overlay. And I'm just going to make sure that it's nice and straight. This one, we definitely have a little bit of wiggle room, so I'm not super concerned about it. I'm going to take my washer and put it underneath, and then I can tell exactly where I want it. And just kind of slide that in. That feels pretty good right there. Make sure that that is centered before I start cutting anything. I feel like it needs to scoot over. That feels pretty good. All right, I'm gonna mark my slits there. I try not to cut through my top stitching if that's possible. Sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. But I am gonna go just through the front part here. I'm not going through the fabric because I don't wanna see the washer. So I'm just gonna cut. And in the inside of the pocket, you will see kind of the ugly part of the washer. You can always put something over top of it, like a little scrap of cork. We've definitely cut some little pieces as we've gone. If you want to do that to cover it up, you can even just add a little bit of glue or just pretend the washer's not there because it's up in the top, and I really don't think it's going to bother you that much. So there's my snap and my pocket. So my back piece is all done. For step 9, we're going to add our G tabs in. These are the little D-ring tabs. Now you might notice here that I have 2 different sets. In the pattern, it's only going to have you make 1 set, and we already used those to make the K tabs. Because I did that, and because there's 2 different options, I went ahead and made an extra set. This is not included in the pattern, but I wanted to show you how both of those would look as far as the assembly is concerned. In the sew along video that I did, I only did the K-tabs because I kind of forgot. I was supposed to have my friend do one and I was going to do the other. We got chatting and I totally forgot. So in your pattern, it's going to be an either or. I wouldn't suggest doing both, but for today, I'm going to do both. That way you can see exactly how they're placed. So the first option is going to be for the crossbody. So I've taken my little G-tabs right here. If I was doing the crossbody option, I would not have the K-tabs at all. I folded them in half and I added a little piece of tape at the bottom just to keep them closed. I'm using the measurement in the pattern and I'm going to place these just like so, and they're going to stand up probably about 3/4 of an inch or so. And I have the measurement here. I marked it so I know where to put that in. What I'm going to do is actually make a little dot because I can feel where the tab is, and I want to make sure that they look nice and they're nicely centered and spaced out, and that's where I'm going to put my rivets. I'm adding these now instead of sewing them because, again, I just think it's going to be a lot stronger and better this way. In the first one that I did in my prototype, I actually punched a hole through all these layers, but what that did is it made this pocket a lot smaller. You're going to end up losing a few inches, which isn't going to be that useful if you're trying to put a phone in there. So for the pattern, the way I wrote it is that you're only punching through the pocket. So I'm going to line this one up too and see. I am not measuring at all. I am just going with the flow. So let's see how I do. I'm going to go ahead and punch holes through both layers. I'm going to move that one out of the way because it's just going to get in the way, and I'm going to unsnap my snap. So I think it's going to be easier if I work from here, get that lined up, and I'm going through my tab as well as the pocket. All right, that is all set. It is as good as it's gonna get. So if you're thinking, wow, that looks totally crooked and uneven, that's okay. I'm human. All right, so it's not my best work, but it's done. Okay, so now that we have those riveted in, you can go ahead and move on to the next step, which is gonna be step 10. Because I'm also going to be showing you these, I'm going to do that next as well. So if you're adding the K-tabs, you would not have these here. And for your K-tabs, what you're going to do is you're going to place them just like so. These are going to face inward and they're going to be about an inch down. It's going to overlap the pocket and the outside. And you're just going to clip that in place. Use the measurement in your pattern. And we'll add another clip right here. Move this one up a little bit. Okay. Once those are in place and you have your tabs facing inward, your D-rings, you're going to stitch 1/8 of an inch just to kind of hold that in place. When that is done, we are going to move on to our final little bit of production, and then we're going to put this bag together. For step 10, you're going to need your E-tabs, and you're also going to need your top zipper. Please double check the measurement of this zipper. You'll need it to be the exact measurement that the pattern says. There's a tiny little bit of wiggle room, but not too much. This is one of those things that if it is too long, it's going to make your assembly steps pretty much impossible. If it's too short, it's going to leave you with a gap. So I have picked the measurement that I picked because it works perfectly with the size of the bag. So I have my top zipper and I have my 2 E squares. I've added some tape to the back of them, and these are going to become the tabs and the finished ends of the zipper. So when you look in your finished bag, this is what you're going to see. Here's the raw edge right here, and this right here, that's my little tiny gap where it's not sewn. That's what keeps the sides nice and neat, and it also gives the zipper a nice finish. So what we're going to do here is just fold these onto the ends and do a little bit of top stitching. These are overcut on purpose They are squares, so it doesn't matter which direction you put them in. If you want it to look a certain way, you can do that. But when you're done, they are going to be longer than they need to be, and you're going to trim them up. So I'm just kind of folding it and pinching it on the end there. It does not matter how much is hanging off. It really does not make any difference at all. Try to get it even, which mine was not. It was kind of crooked. So just like that, I kind of fold it in half in my hand and then stick it on the end of the zipper. Align these edges right here. And don't worry about these ends. It's going to be longer until we trim it. So once we have that in place, you're just going to stitch 1/8 of an inch across that long raw edge and then trim your sides even with your zipper. For step 11, we're going to complete our bag. So I have my outside front and back, my completed top zipper. I have my 2 L pieces for my lining. I've got tape and I have clips. So I'm going to set aside the back and one of my L pieces. I'm going to start with one of my linings, my front, and my zipper. I'm going to use a little bit of tape here. And I'm going to place the tape right along the top edge of the front. So I'm going to place that all the way along here. You can do the same with your lining piece too. Usually I just use clips for that, but it's totally up to you. So I'm going to place my tape on there and peel that off. Get rid of my paper. Now I'm going to take my zipper and I'm going to place my zipper right side down. I have my opening to the left, so my zipper opens like this, and I'm going to place it right side down. Now my zipper is not as wide as my piece here, and that is correct. Again, that's how we're going to get those nice finished ends, and we're not going to catch these tabs when we're sewing. So if you want to find the center of both, you can. I'm just going to eyeball it and just get that lined up there. It's always going to be a little tricky with the zipper pull. So as we're sewing, we will move that out of the way. But for right now, I'm just going to do the best that I can to get that nice and straight. And it looks real good to me. I am overlapping a little tiny bit, like 1/8 of an inch on either end of my flap. It looks very centered to me. So now that my zipper is right side down on the outside, I'm going to take one of my lining pieces. This is the right side. The rubbery side is the wrong side, and I'm going to put right side down. I'm going to use that little bit of tape on the end to kind of stick that in place, and then I'll add some clips. Here is the first half of the sandwich. All right. So I've got my outside front, my zipper right sides together, my lining and outside also right sides together. At my machine, I'm going to sew 1/4 of an inch all the way across, making sure that I backstitch. First half is sewn. And one other thing I wanted to mention, especially as we add our other 2 pieces on, we're not sewing through a lot of bulk, but we're sewing next to bulk. And sometimes our machine kind of wants to do its own thing and the foot wants to push you. Don't be afraid to move your zipper pull or to try a different foot. If the foot that you're having isn't working, you can always mark your 1/4 inch seam and sew on it. Use whatever is going to work the best for you. And if you're having a problem at all going through any of these layers, especially because we're going from thin to thicker to thin to thicker, you don't have to sew from this end to this end in one swoop. Don't feel defeated if you have to sew a little bit and sew a little bit or start here and sew out. It doesn't matter. As long as you get to the finish line, it doesn't matter how you got there. So now that we have this sewn with our 1/4 inch, we're going to fold that back. And I like to add a couple of clips to keep everything out of my way. So I'm just going to clip down here on the bottom. Now I'm going to repeat that step with these 2 pieces. These are going to go on the opposite side of the zipper. So one more time, I'm going to add my tape and I'm going to see if I can tuck those D-rings down out of the way. The back is very bulky, not where we're sewing, but next to where we're sewing. So the back, I think, takes a little extra planning, a little extra time. Also, the back never seems to be as straight as the front, which is why I start with the front. All right, peel my paper off. There we go. And I'm going to put this piece right sides together with this one. So back and front are right sides together. I'm gonna do it this way towards me. Line up my sides and get my zipper. Okay. This just might take a little bit of finagling. I may have to pull it close to me, so forgive me for just a minute. I'm trying to keep my sides lined up and get my zipper in place. Okay, there we go. We got that. Now we're going to take our second lining piece. This is the right side of my lining, and this is the right side. I want those right sides together. This is always a tricky part for everybody, so if you do it wrong, you're not alone. But we always want our things to be right sides together. I'm clipping on the side even though I'm not sewing there. So I'm clipping right here. I've got my lining right sides together. I've got the other half of the zipper right side together with the back. I'm using tape and clips and whatever I need to hold this in place. And now I'm going to do the same thing, 1/4 of an inch, open my zipper when I need to, make sure everything stays together. There's my 2 lining pieces, right sides together, outside, front and back, right sides together. I'm going to sew this seam and I'll be back to discuss top stitching. Once that second seam is sewn, we're going to open up. So we've got both of our lining pieces facing down and both of our outside pieces facing up. And if you're not ironing, which a lot of times I don't at this stage, make sure that you're giving a nice tug to your pieces and clipping them down here before you top stitch. If you don't, what can happen is your lining can roll right into where the zipper is. You see how it kind of wants to do that right here? Give that a tug. I'm not pulling it so hard that I'm distorting it, but I'm pulling it away from the zipper firmly, because if it rolls into the zipper and gets in the teeth, it's not going to work. You're going to have a bag that you will not be able to open or close. Once it gets stuck, it's very hard to get that out. And we don't want to do all this work and all these hours just to have it not be able to be finished. So right here you can see, kind of smooth that with my fingers. I don't want this rolling into the zipper. So don't be afraid to give it a gentle tug. Add clips anywhere that you need to keep things smooth. Press it if you want. Use a pressing clapper. That helps very much. Okay. All right. These clips are really not for any purpose except just to help me with top stitching. So from the front here, I'm going to do my top stitching 1/8 of an inch. 1/8 of an inch is your absolute maximum. You don't want to top stitch any more than that. A 1/16 is fine, 1/8 is fine, 1/4 is too much. So just 1/8 of an inch. And you want to top stitch from your tab down to your tab. Don't start down here. You don't want to start on the end. It's going to make the assembly impossible. You're going to have really ugly corners. So you want to start at the end of your tab and go to the other end. Do the same thing here. Let me grab the finish bag. You can see here, my top stitching stops right there and it stops right there. So we're just going from one tab to the other. I'm going to do that and then we will start putting this together because we're almost done. Got my top stitching done. My zipper is open already. If yours is not, please go ahead and open your zipper. I'm going to take these clips off so that we can turn this the correct way and start closing it up. So first things first is we're going to take outside to outside, lining to lining. And the first seam that I always like to clip is the center seam. And it's not going to be the easiest seam or the most beautiful, but whenever it doesn't look good, it doesn't look good in the lining and it kind of gets hidden under the zipper. So don't stress about it. What you're going to do here is get this seam lined up as best as you can and try to nest your seams. So nesting just means that one goes to the right and one goes to the left. Get that clipped in. You can add a couple more clips here. And before I worry about anything else, I'm going to do the same thing over here. So nest those seams, one to the left and one to the right, and they kind of tell you which way they want to go. And you can see I'm getting this weird little pucker in my lining, but I promise you all of my bags have that and you can't tell. So now that I have the center lined up, I'm gonna go ahead and finish clipping all the way around. Our final seam is going to be all the way around, leaving an opening for turning. We're going to use a 1/4 inch seam, and we're not going to worry if we start and stop all in one line. We don't have to start here and end here and be done with it. We're going to sew it however it makes the most sense and however it gets us through. We're going to stop and leave a nice large opening for turning. And I don't mean a little opening. I mean one that I can get my whole hand into, because this is stiff. So we want to make sure we can get our entire hand inside this bag. You're going to sew a little bit here. You're going to sew all the way down this seam, across the outside bottom, down the long seam, and around this corner. There are no corners to box. There's no gussets. This is a flat bag and it stays flat just like this. So once we get that sewn, we're going to turn, close up the lining, and add our handle. So before I turn this, let's take a look, and I have a little tip for you for your corners as well. I have my scissors as well as my turning tool. As you can see, my little side right here, as I cross over the center, it doesn't look great, but it really doesn't make a difference once the bag is done. I even have a little pucker right here. I should fix that. I'm not going to. It's totally fine. So what I'm going to do before I turn is in each of my corners, the lining and the outside, is I'm going to cut at a 45-degree angle. And I did reinforce my corners a little bit. I like to do that. I forget to mention that sometimes, and I apologize, but I take a few extra stitches. So even if my stitches are into the corner where I cut, it's not a big deal. Cutting that much in the corner, cutting it down to about 1/8 of an inch, really helps to get a smooth corner. Now, when it comes to turning, if you have your iron on, you can always steam your bag and soften it a little bit, because you do have a lot of thick stuff going on here and it can get a little bit hard to turn and it can get kind of stiff. So what I like to do though is I'm not a fan of reaching in and just yanking at my bag, because I don't want to rip anything. So what I try to do is grab anything, like I just unsnapped my flap and I unsnapped my tab, because I can pull those through. And on this side right here, I'm going to start kind of turning like this and kind of work it a little bit like so. You can already see the cork is coming out. Instead of trying to reach in and pull everything at once, which generally doesn't work and often ends up in ripped stitches or ripping off a tab or a flap or something, just kind of peel it. Don't turn it, peel it, if that makes any sense. Okay, so once we get the bulk of that out and we've got our nice little wadded up bag, now we can kind of get in here and gently push. And once you start to see the majority of it come through, now you're going to start working on your corners. So I'm trying as best as I can to get my thumb and index finger on that corner, and I may not be able to. I've got my middle finger in there, not for any reason, but it just happened to reach. Give that a little push, a little tug. And then once I get that going, I take my turning tool and I put that in here. And I'm kind of scooping it back and forth, swooping it, pushing it. You pick the word. Okay, there we go. All right, do the same over here. The better you do now, the happier you'll be when it's all done, because once you close up the lining, it's kind of game over. You don't really have the chance to do anything then. So I'm going to pull my tabs. There we go. And I'm gonna put my finger under the end of the zipper and kind of pull that up, because that is dipped down, but doesn't need to be. All right, she's looking good. Last thing I need to do, close my lining. So I'm just going to poke my lining corner out. And the lining corner came out pretty nice. All right, do this one. Now I'm gonna just tuck these edges in and sew across. And here is a strange little tip for you. Because I use waterproof canvas, sometimes what ends up happening when you close this is you almost get this like balloon. You get this air kind of caught in here, and because it's a waterproof fabric, it doesn't want to get out. So I will leave this tiniest little hole when I sew my lining so that I can push that air out, just kind of work it out. Otherwise, I feel like it makes my bag puffy. I know that's strange. I'm well aware of that. So I'm gonna go sew this and tuck it in, and then we'll take one final look with the handle on. She is beauty, she is grace. I am very happy with how this came out. I'll move my junk aside. There is my ID window. I've got my credit card pockets. My snap is lined up. I've got my other snap on the back here. I have some, well, not the best rivets I've ever put in, but that's okay. So there's my D-rings. If I want to use this as a crossbody, I can just hook this here and here, and that's going to sit against my body. It's going to be a little shoulder bag or a crossbody. I've got the adjustable part right here. If I want to wear it as a sling, which is how I normally tend to wear mine, I can hook it right on here. And because this is a removable handle, you can make extras. You can make different ones if you want to use seatbelt webbing, if you want to use anything else that you like. You don't have to make a thin handle out of cork. I love how this came out. Again, I know I've said it a few times. I probably would not do another one where I have both of the tab options. But if it's something you want to do, now you've seen how it looks. You know how to do either or both if you want to. So I hope you like this tutorial. I hope that you will download your pattern and make your own Linda. I'd love to see how they come out. If you like videos like this, don't forget to click subscribe, hit the notification bell, and give it a thumbs up. Thank you so much for watching.